My name is Nehemiah, and this is my journey. It's the account of how someone like me, a simple cupbearer, came to play a big role in rebuilding the city of Jerusalem. You need to know that I was living far from my homeland. A long time ago, my people were taken from Israel and forced into exile. We had turned away from God and refused to change, even after He warned us. Because of that, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came and took us away. He invaded Israel 3 separate times, each time taking more people back with him. This exile shouldn't have surprised us. The prophet Jeremiah had already said it would happen, that it would last 70 years, and only after that would we be allowed to return. Many years have gone by. Nebuchadnezzar is gone, but we are still living in a foreign land. Now, King Artaxerxes of Persia is in power. I serve him as his cupbearer. Because of my duties, I live in the royal fortress in the capital city Shushan. Though I was physically in Persia, my heart was in Jerusalem, which lay hundreds of miles away. I longed to hear how the city and its people were doing. Some might wonder why I cared so much about a distant land I had never seen, and people I didn't even know. But my love for God meant my concern wasn't focused on myself anymore. It was for others. I deeply cared about those who had returned to Judah. Even though I hadn't lived through what they did, I felt connected to them. One day, one of my brothers arrived from Judah with a few others. I asked them how things were going with the people who had made it back and with Jerusalem. They told me things were very bad. The people there were facing hardship and disgrace. The wall around the city was broken down and the gates had been burned. What they told me was heartbreaking. They were called survivors, but even that name didn't offer much hope. The people were struggling, and the ruined walls only made things worse. Without walls, the city was exposed and defenseless. Enemies could easily attack. There was nothing to stop anyone from coming in and taking whatever they wanted. A place without walls could never feel safe. Even if the temple was rebuilt, it wouldn't last because anything valuable would be taken. The people lived in constant fear, never knowing when danger would strike, and every man worries about the safety of his family. Hearing all this crushed me. My legs gave out and I sat down. Tears ran down my face as I began to mourn deeply. For several days I cried, refused to eat, and poured out my heart to the God of heaven. I prayed, "Lord, God of the heavens, you are mighty and worthy of awe. You always stay true to your promise of love for those who love you and follow your commands. Please listen closely to what I'm saying and watch over me as I pray day and night for your people, Israel. I admit our wrongdoings. We Israelites, myself included, and even my own family, have all sinned against you. We have behaved terribly toward you. We didn't follow the commands, instructions, and laws you gave through Moses, your servant. Remember what you told him. If we turned away from you, we would be scattered among other nations. But you also promised that if we returned to you and obeyed your commands, then no matter how far away we were, you would bring us back to the place you chose to carry your name. These people belong to you. They are the ones you rescued with your strong and powerful hand. Lord, I ask again, please listen to me, your servant, and to all who respect your name and find joy in worshiping you. Today, help me succeed. Let me find favor with the man I serve. I didn't look for someone else to fix things. I didn't complain. I simply did what I knew I had to do. I turned to God and prayed with all my heart. I never forgot who I was praying to. While many believe in different gods, only the God of heaven could truly help me. I gave him all my pain and worry, trusting he would take care of it. As the king's cupbearer, my job was to serve him wine and test it first. This was a trusted role in the royal palace. I was more than a servant. I was the king's personal protector. I had to taste everything before he did, making sure it wasn't poisoned. The king had to trust me completely. A cupbearer had to be loyal, honest, and someone the king could rely on without hesitation. If someone could turn the cupbearer against the king's life would be in serious danger. Because of the trust between us, the king often asked for my thoughts on important matters. After 4 months of praying and waiting, my prayers were finally answered. One day, everything changed. I came before the king with a heavy heart. My sadness showed on my face. The king had never seen me like that before. He looked at me and asked, "Why do you look so sad when you're clearly not sick? This must be sadness from deep within." Now, you have to understand, in the royal court, showing sorrow wasn't allowed. It was considered improper. Kings believed they were so powerful and important that just being near them should take all your sadness away. Looking sad in front of the king could have been seen as deeply disrespectful. When he said, "This is clearly sadness of heart," I realized he had noticed, and he didn't take it lightly. At that moment, he could have easily ordered my death. I was terrified, but I chose to speak honestly. I said, "May the king live forever. How can I not be sad when the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins and its gates are burned down?" The king then asked, "What is it that you're asking for?" My heart raced. This was it, the moment that could change everything. So much depended on what happened next. I knew I couldn't control the king's heart, so before I spoke again, I silently prayed and placed it all in God's hands. Then I responded. I explained what was troubling me. Jerusalem, a city once full of glory, was now destroyed and shamed. The king didn't react with anger. Instead, he asked, "How can I help?" That's when I knew God had answered those 4 months of prayer. I said, "If it pleases the king, and if you find me trustworthy, send me to Judah, to the city where my ancestors are buried, so I can rebuild it." With the queen sitting beside him, the king asked, "How long will you be gone? When will you return?" He was willing to send me, and that was an incredible honor. But I was ready. During those months of prayer, I hadn't just been asking, I'd also been planning. So I gave the king a time frame. Then I said, "If it pleases the king, may I also have letters for the governors across the river to ensure safe travel to Judah? And a letter to Asaph, who manages the royal forest, so he'll provide timber for the fortress gates near the temple, the city wall, and the house I'll live in." I knew I'd need official permission to travel safely. I knew what materials would be necessary, and I understood the scale of the work ahead. The fortress gates, the wall, my residence, I had thought through it all. I didn't need more time to plan. Those 4 months were enough. The king granted every request. I could feel God's favor in all of it. Only He could have made this happen. Then I set out, bringing the king's letters to the governors in the region beyond the Euphrates. The king had even sent military officers and horsemen to accompany me. I was fully prepared. I also had all the timber I would need from the royal forest. The king of Persia had responded generously to my request. But while it all seemed promising, this would only be the start. Ahead of me were challenges that could threaten everything I had set out to do. When I reached the governor's outpost, I came across 2 men who were strongly against anything good happening in Jerusalem: Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite. They were deeply upset that someone had come to check on the well-being of the people of Israel. As long as Jerusalem stayed weak and defenseless, they didn't care. Even with the temple standing and worship happening, they were fine with that, as long as God's people remained insecure, worn down, and under pressure. But I didn't let their disapproval stop me. Their opposition didn't show up while I was praying, or while I was making plans, or even when I first had the vision. It appeared only once real progress started. I came to Jerusalem with a heart full of dreams, hope, prayer, and strong support from the king. People definitely noticed when I arrived, accompanied by soldiers and bringing timber from the king's forest in Persia. Still, I didn't speak about my mission right away. 3 days after arriving, I quietly set out at night with a few men. This was my first time in Jerusalem. It finally felt like home. That night we went out through the valley gate and started inspecting the walls of the city. The damage was clear. The walls were broken and the gates had been reduced to ashes. I needed to see how bad the situation really was before any rebuilding could begin. I could have just focused on the positive things, the fact that we had returned to Judah, the rebuilt temple, the sacrifices and worship being carried out. And yes, some progress had been made, slowly but surely. There was a lot to be thankful for, but sometimes you have to face the hard truth. And that's what I did. At that point, no one in the city, no priests, no leaders, no officials, knew what I was planning. I hadn't shared anything about my mission yet. The people of Jerusalem hadn't just been sitting around waiting for someone to rescue them. More likely, they had lost hope. This problem had lasted for 100 years, and when someone tried to fix it in the past, enemies had quickly shut them down. So they gave up and accepted things as they were. Then I spoke up. I told them, "You can see how bad things are. Jerusalem is in ruins and the gates are burned. Let's rebuild the wall together so that we are no longer living in shame." When I laid out the vision for restoring the walls, that meeting became incredibly important. There was no way I could do it on my own, and if the city leaders didn't stand with me, I would have been in serious trouble. So I told them how God had been helping me every step of the way, and about everything the king had said to support my mission. I made it clear to the leaders, this wasn't just my mission, this was God's mission, and they understood. They responded, "Let's begin rebuilding." So the work started, and it was a good and noble task. But as soon as Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard about it, they mocked us and tried to tear us down. They laughed and said, "What do you think you're doing? Are you trying to rebel against the king?" Their words were full of scorn and sarcasm. Tobiah held real influence. He had family ties to the high priest and could use those relationships to gain support from some of the priests. Ironically, his name means Yahweh is good, which was strange for someone who actively opposed God's work. Sanballat, through marriage, was also linked to priestly families. These weren't foreign enemies. They were our own people, fellow citizens of Jerusalem. You'd think they would be on our side, but they weren't. Facing opposition is tough, but it's even harder when the pushback comes from those who should stand with you. It feels like betrayal. Sanballat and Tobiah used mockery as a weapon. Their goal was to humiliate me, to make me feel small, foolish, and out of place. They looked down on us and scoffed. Their question, "Are you rebelling against the king?" revealed how little they understood about God's authority. To them, the Persian king was the highest power. They didn't realize, or didn't care, that God was above every king. In truth, they didn't know what they were talking about. The king of Persia had fully supported the project and even helped supply what we needed. But even if the king hadn't approved, that wouldn't have stopped us, because the God of heaven was with us, and his support was more than enough. I didn't waste time arguing with them. I simply said, "The God of heaven will help us succeed. We, his servants, will begin rebuilding. But you have no part in this city, no claim, no right, and no connection here." And so we got to work. The high priest and the other priests began by rebuilding the sheep gate. These gates were crucial. They were the city's main entry points and the places most vulnerable to enemy attack. That's why we started with the gates, expanding out from each one. When a gate was finished, we dedicated it to God, marking it as sacred and set apart for his purposes. These gates weren't just structures. they were offered to God. The priests knew that everything, even the walls and gates, belonged to Him. Everyone's effort mattered. Each man, each family was given a specific section to work on. Everyone had their responsibility, and every piece of the wall was part of something bigger. Most people joined in and helped rebuild, but not everyone. The nobles from the city of Tekoa refused to participate. They thought they were too important for hard labor. They wouldn't humble themselves or follow what God wanted. Their problem wasn't about ability, it was about refusing to submit. In contrast, people from all kinds of jobs, including those with no experience in building, worked on the Yashana gate. They weren't trained for this kind of task. Honestly, they had every excuse to sit out, but instead they stepped up and got to work. Even though others doubted their ability, they helped build Jerusalem's walls. They placed beams, fitted doors, and secured everything with bolts and bars. I made sure everyone was personally responsible for a section of the wall. Each man had his own area, and everyone knew who was in charge of what. No one wanted it said that they did a poor job when working for God. People from all levels of society came together for the task. The man with only a small room, the city leaders, and even the high priest all worked side by side. I welcomed people who wanted to try something new. I encouraged them to start repairing near their own homes. I didn't turn anyone away just because of their past mistakes or sins. But as soon as Sanballat heard we were rebuilding the wall, he was furious. He mocked us in front of his friends and the army of Samaria. He said, "What are these weak people doing? Do they really think they can rebuild the wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Do they think they'll finish in a single day? Can they revive stones from this pile of burned rubble?" Tobiah, who was beside him, added his own insult. "Whatever they're building, even a little fox walking on it would knock it down." At this point, the work was well underway, and their anger had grown. They were no longer just mocking, they were truly upset about our progress. As with most insults, there was a little truth hidden in their words. We weren't the strongest builders. We wouldn't finish quickly. We didn't have the best equipment, but their goal was to make us doubt ourselves. I didn't argue. I didn't create a strategy group. I didn't even speak to them. I took it straight to God in prayer. I said, "Listen to us, O God, for we are being mocked. Turn their insults back on them. Let them be taken away as captives. Don't overlook their guilt or erase their sins, because they've insulted the people doing your work." Despite the ridicule, we kept building. We worked until the entire wall had reached half its height, and we got there because the people were fully committed, with their hearts in the work. But when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod heard about the progress and saw that the gaps in the wall were closing, they were furious. They all joined together and came up with a plan to attack Jerusalem and create chaos. The mocking had now turned into threats of violence. This was a serious situation. The wall was meant to protect us from violent attacks, but now it seemed like the very act of building it might provoke one. People were starting to worry. All their effort could end up being wasted if an attack happened before we finished. The goal of our enemies was to cause confusion among God's people. And when people are confused, they can't move forward. They lose focus. That's exactly what the enemy wanted, for us to forget about God and His promises and get lost in fear and distraction. But we didn't give in. We kept praying to our God. And because of the threats, we posted guards to watch day and night. Nothing would make us stop seeking God. We didn't assume that unanswered prayers meant God wasn't listening. We had more faith in Him than that. I made a firm decision. I wouldn't let the safety of daytime or the tiredness of nighttime stop the work. And that decision sent a clear message. It told God's people, we're serious about this. We believe God is with us, and He will help us overcome every obstacle. It told our enemies, "You will not win." This work has already begun, and nothing will stop what God has started. It told God, "We trust you." Our faith isn't just something we say, it's something we live out. It's real. It's active. Lord, we love you. We believe in you. But even with that trust, the problems didn't disappear. There were struggles from the outside, and now there were struggles on the inside too. People from Judah, the tribe known for its strength, the tribe that gave us great kings, started to lose heart. They said, "We're too tired. There's too much rubble. We can't keep building." This came from the very tribe expected to be the strongest. That made it especially discouraging. You see, reaching the halfway point in a big project is one of the hardest places to be. You've already done a lot, so you're tired, but there's still so much more to do, and it feels overwhelming. Building the wall wasn't just about construction. It also meant cleaning up and removing the trash that had piled up over the years. For a century, the broken wall had been left untouched. It had become a dumping ground. We couldn't ignore the debris. It had to be cleared. All the shattered remains and collected rubbish had to be removed so we could build on solid ground, the true foundations. If we didn't clear the rubble and build properly, the wall wouldn't last. And just when things were already difficult, our enemies began plotting something deadly. They said, "They won't even see us coming. We'll sneak in, kill them, and stop the work for good." The workers were already feeling discouraged, and now this new threat made them want to quit. Our enemies had realized that the only way to stop God's people from continuing the work was to destroy them completely. But the people living nearby heard about the plan and warned us. God's enemies tried everything they could, but God was still in control. What they didn't realize was that loyal people were listening, quietly picking up on their schemes. The people who heard the threats didn't know exactly what to do. They were frightened. And maybe it bothered them that I wasn't scared like they were. So I took action. I positioned families behind the lowest and most vulnerable parts of the wall, posting them with swords, spears, and bows. After surveying everything, I stood and spoke to the officials and everyone else. I told them, "Don't be afraid. Remember the Lord, who is mighty and incredible. Stand up and fight for your families, your sons and daughters, your wives and your homes." I told them to arm themselves. This was the moment to take things seriously, to be fully prepared and use every tool and weapon we had. I looked at the situation from a broader view. Yes, the work was hard, but there was no reason to panic. I reminded them why we were doing this in the first place. When our enemies found out that we knew their plan and that God had ruined it, they backed off. We returned to the wall and got back to work. Just the sight of our readiness made them retreat. They realized they wouldn't win a fight. They had hoped we'd make it easy for them by being unprepared. But we were ready. From that point forward, half of the men worked while the other half stood guard with swords, shields, bows, and armor. The officers remained nearby to support the workers from Judah. Those carrying building materials did their tasks with one hand and kept a weapon in the other. I gathered the nobles, the leaders, and the rest of the people and told them, "This job is huge and we're spread out across the wall. If you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to that place. Our God will fight for us." I also instructed everyone to stay inside Jerusalem at night, so they could serve as guards during the night and work during the day. None of us, not me, my brothers, my men, or the guards, took off our clothes to rest. We kept our weapons close, even when we went to get water. But then a new problem arose. The men and their wives began to cry out loudly. Some were saying, "We have so many children." Some people came forward with desperate cries. "We need grain to survive and feed our families." Others said, We've had to mortgage our fields, our vineyards, and even our homes just to get food during this famine. Still more shared, we had to borrow money just to pay taxes on our land. Although my story isn't about wealth, the reality is that money problems directly impacted the rebuilding. People couldn't focus fully on the wall because their personal needs were being stretched thin. They were struggling financially for several reasons. First, working on the wall took time away from earning a living. Second, there was a famine, and food had become extremely expensive, so expensive that some had to put their land up as collateral to buy it. And third, government taxes continued, even as income dropped and the cost of living went up. No one was complaining about unfair taxation, but that didn't make the burden any lighter. To survive, people took out loans, but many couldn't repay them. Some had even given up their children to work as servants just to clear their debts. Meanwhile, the wealthy were exploiting the crisis, charging interest as high as 12% a year. It became clear to me, if we didn't address these financial injustices, God's work would grind to a halt without a single attack from our enemies. So I called a public meeting. I said, as best we could, we've redeemed our fellow Jews who were sold to foreigners, and now you're selling your own people into slavery only for us to buy them back again. The room went silent. No one had anything to say. To make things right, my companions and I began lending grain and money to help those in need. I told the wealthy nobles to stop charging interest altogether. I demanded that they return the fields, vineyards, olive groves, homes, and interest they had taken from the people. They agreed. They said, "We'll return everything. We won't ask for anything more. We'll do exactly what you say." To make sure they followed through, I called the priests and made the nobles and officials take a formal oath to keep their promise. Then I did something symbolic. I shook out the folds of my robe and declared, "Let God shake out of their homes and wealth anyone who breaks this promise. May they be emptied just like this garment." The whole crowd responded, "Amen," and praised God. And the people followed through with what they had pledged. Soon after that, I was appointed governor of Judah. But even then, neither I nor my brothers took the usual food allowance given to governors. Past governors had heavily taxed the people, demanding 40 silver shekels in addition to food and drink. Their assistants also treated the people harshly, but I didn't follow their example. I respected God too much to abuse my role. Instead, I poured my energy into rebuilding the wall. All my men were focused on the work, gathered and committed. We didn't buy up land or seek personal gain, and beyond our construction efforts, I also cared for 150 fellow Jews and officials who ate at my table daily. Every day we prepared 1 ox, 6 specially selected sheep, and poultry. Every 10 days, there was a fresh supply of assorted wines. But even with all this, I never once demanded the food allowance meant for the governor. The people were already under heavy pressure, and I didn't want to add to their burden. When Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies heard that the wall had been completely rebuilt, with no gaps left, though the gates hadn't yet been hung, they made a new move. Sanballat and Geshem sent a message asking me to meet them in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. But I saw through their plan. They wanted to harm me. So I sent a reply. "I'm doing important work and can't come down. Why should the work stop just so I can come meet you?" They sent this message 4 times. Each time, I answered the same way. I was focused. I refused to fall into their trap or even allow myself to be distracted. Then, for the 5th time, Sanballat sent his servant with an open letter. This time, the attack was public. The letter said rumors were spreading among the nations and confirmed by Geshem that I was planning a rebellion. It claimed I was rebuilding the wall to make myself king, and that I had even arranged for prophets to declare, There is a king in Judah." The letter threatened that this would be reported to the king and urged me once again to meet. But I replied firmly, "None of what you're saying is true. You're making it up." Their whole tactic was to create fear. They hoped to discourage us so badly that we would stop working. But I didn't waste my time arguing with lies. I didn't try to explain away every accusation. People like Sanballat don't want explanations, they want surrender, and I wouldn't give them that. You don't silence a slanderer by proving them wrong. I recognized that the purpose of all this was fear, and I chose not to let fear in. No enemy can force us to be afraid. Fear is something we have to choose, and I chose faith instead. Still, the attacks didn't stop. One day I visited Shemaiah, a man who was confined to his home. He said, "Let's go hide in the house of God inside the temple. Let's shut the doors. They're coming to kill you tonight." But I said to myself, should someone like me run away in fear? Should I go hide in the temple just to save my own life? No, I would not go. Shemaiah had tried to scare me into breaking God's command. The temple was sacred, and only priests were allowed inside. I was not a priest. Entering would have been a direct act of disobedience. That's when I realized God hadn't sent Shemaiah. He had been bribed by the enemy to prophesy against me. The whole plan was to frighten me, so I'd sin by hiding in the temple. Then they could use that against me to ruin my reputation and discredit me as a leader. But their plan didn't work. When news spread that the wall was finally complete, fear struck the nations around us. Their confidence collapsed when they realized this wall had been rebuilt with God's help. What amazed everyone was how fast it had been done. After more than a century in ruins, the walls were restored in just 52 days. Why hadn't it been done in the 100 years before? It wasn't that people didn't notice the destruction. It wasn't that no one cared. The broken walls were plain to see, and everyone knew how vulnerable Jerusalem had become. But no one had moved beyond simply wishing things would change. When the wall was completed, our enemies were crushed, not just because the wall stood, but because they could clearly see God's hand in it. The strong, protected people of Jerusalem now stood as a witness to the power of our God. Still, there were those who stayed close to the enemy. Some nobles in Judah had family ties to Tobiah. Yes, the very man who had tried to stop us. These nobles were writing letters to him regularly and receiving replies. Many in Judah had even sworn loyalty to him. They praised him to me and then reported everything I said back to him. And Tobiah kept sending letters, trying to scare me. Once the wall was finished and the gates were finally set in place, I appointed the gatekeepers, the musicians, and the Levites to their positions. The Levites and singers were assigned to lead the people in worship. You see, the purpose of the wall wasn't just safety. It wasn't about pride in a strong city. It was built so that the people of Jerusalem could worship God freely and gloriously, more than ever before. I placed my brother in charge of the city alongside Hananiah, the commander of the fortress, because he was a man of integrity who truly honored God more than most. I instructed them, "Do not open the gates of Jerusalem until the sun is high." While the gatekeepers were still on duty, I instructed them to close and lock the doors. I also appointed residents of Jerusalem to act as guards, some at their assigned stations, others near their own homes. The victory was great. The walls were up, but they couldn't protect the city on their own. We needed watchmen who were alert and committed. That's why the gates were opened late and closed early. Security mattered. The city itself was large and open, but it still lacked people, and many houses hadn't been rebuilt. Then God placed it on my heart to gather the nobles, officials, and the people so that we could record their family lines. I knew Jerusalem had to grow and thrive, but first I needed to know who was already there. just like when I had first walked through the ruins to see the damage for myself. And then something powerful happened. A revival began. Everyone came together as one, men, women, and children, standing in the square near the water gate. They called on Ezra the scribe to bring out the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had given to Israel. Ezra had been the one who led the rebuilding of the temple and helped bring people back to true worship. I simply continued the work he started. So Ezra the priest brought out the law and read it to the entire assembly, all who could understand. He stood in the open square and read from morning until midday. Everyone listened closely to the words from the book of the law. This book, the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, was Israel's guide to living rightly before God. Then I, Nehemiah the governor, along with Ezra and the Levites who helped teach the people, told everyone, "Today is a holy day for the Lord your God. Don't cry or mourn." But the people wept as they heard the words of the law. It touched their hearts deeply. Then Ezra told them, "Go and celebrate. Enjoy rich food and sweet drinks. Share with those who don't have anything prepared. This day belongs to the Lord. Don't be sad. The joy of the Lord is your strength." The Levites calmed the crowd, saying, "Be still. This is a sacred day. Don't be overwhelmed with sorrow." You see, I wasn't just concerned with rebuilding Jerusalem's outer walls. I also focused on renewing our faith and restoring spiritual life in Judah. I saw a need. I rose to meet it. I shaped a clear vision, made a plan, and inspired others to join me. My story is one of faith and perseverance. Though I lived far from home, I never lost hope that I'd return. I spent most of my life in exile, in a land that didn't honor God, but I never stopped trusting in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I prayed constantly. I brought everything before God. I prayed for my people without ceasing, and because of that I was honored, not just for my work, but for my persistence and my heart. I never gave up hope, not just for a return to our land, but for a return to the God who called Abraham from this very region and made a covenant with him. A covenant I still believe is eternal. My name is Nehemiah, and this is my story.